Welcome to the Living Consciously TV show, coming to you live from our Denver, Colorado studios. I'm your host and moderator, Coach Steve Toth, and our theme today is the parents of divorce. Let me introduce you to our guest and also our cast members on Skype, starting with our guest, Barry Fisher, family law attorney, and he's also the founder of the Divorce Project. Welcome to the studio and to the show.
Well, thank you for having me. I love being here.
It's great to have you, and you're a returning guest, and last time when we were here, we were talking about the children of divorce, and now we're going to look at the other part of the casualty.
Correct. The first casualty are the kids, the second casualties are the parents.
Yeah, we're looking forward to it. So our cast members, starting with Jamie Lerner, she's our Self-Growth and Relationship cast member, and she's joining us from Chicago, Illinois. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Awesome to have you. And then also Nina Diver de Rosa. She's also our Self-Growth as well as our Healthcast member. And she's joining us from Las Vegas, Nevada. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Steve. It's wonderful to be here. And thank you, too. It's nice to see Barry again, too.
Thank you.
Fantastic. And also Linda Dyer. She's a Self-Growth and Healthcast member. And she's joining us from a continent called Australia. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. It's absolutely sure.
All right, so the first segment is going to go something like this. We'll explore in a dialogue between all of us the issues and problems that divorce creates for parents. And then in the second half of the show, the second segment, we will explore, again in the dialogue, what are the tools and some of the modalities that the cast members as well as our guest has used either for themselves or for their clients to help parents in a divorce situation. So beginning with our leading question for Barry. Barry, how do people know when their marriage is over?
Well, they don't always know when it's over. Sometimes they think it's over, but they stay in the marriage another 5 or 10 years for other reasons. But a marriage is over when the people say, one person says it's over in California.
Interesting.
Because it's a no-fault state, so either person can declare that the marriage is over.
Do they usually go through a separation process before they actually come see you?
No. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. Every situation is different. Most of these divorces occur because of a feeling of betrayal or infidelity. So when that occurs, people are angry and upset. So maybe one person moves out of the residence, the other one remains behind, and then they come seek a lawyer.
Interesting. So what do you recommend that people should do? Like when somebody's thinking about divorce or they actually have made up their minds already, is there something like a list of things that you can think of from your experience that they should be thinking about to prepare?
Yes. Well, I think the first thing they should do is discuss it with their partner. And most people can't. They're unable to. But that would be a great starting place. Because I think if two people could be in love, fall in love, get married, live together for 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, or 20 years, have kids, have a family, have all these events go by in their life, why shouldn't they be able to sit down and talk about it? But they usually can't. So the preparation for divorce usually becomes a hoarding of resources. Each side grabs as much as they can grab because they're afraid the other side's not going to give it to them later. Or they're not going to get it.
Wow.
So there's a great insecurity that comes up.
So does that mean to say that there's kind of coming under a financial situation rather than it is of sort of two people?
Well, divorce is a dissolution of not only the personal relationship, but of the business, of the family assets, what they've accumulated, the residence. You take one whole family and you divide it, and now you have to have two households. How do you accomplish that? Who's going to pay for what?
Okay, so I would like to ask a question of you, Barry, because you are the attorney, and I am under the impression that most attorneys, they fuel this fire between the two people that are wanting to get divorced. So I'm wondering if you personally give different kinds of advice to someone who comes to you wanting to get divorced.
Absolutely. The first part of your statement, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No. And maybe you could like explain to us how that would be different, how you would go about it differently than other attorneys that we might be all aware of.
Okay. In first place, some attorneys do fuel the fire because their motivation is to make money. They're there to cause a greater rupture so that they could get rich on it. And so they fan the fires. My approach is completely different. I explore the possibility of reconciliation. I explore the possibility of is there anything that you can do to try to make this still work? And after the person says no to that, then we go through the procedure of how to protect them.
Okay, how common is that?
Which part?
The part from the divorce attorney in terms of that strategy?
I think it's probably split about 50-50 among attorneys.
Okay, let's clarify something. What does it cost these days to become an attorney?
Cost to become an attorney? Well, it depends what school you go to. It's you have to complete your bachelor's and go to school for 3 years during the day or 3.5 years at night and pass the bar. If you go to USC, it could be, $200,000. If you go to a smaller school, it could be $25,000.
Okay, so it could be anywhere from 25 to 200. So don't you think that clients need to have that information and that knowledge, because ultimately the attorney is going to want to recoup that money, right?
Well, if the attorney does a good job, regardless of the outcome of the divorce, they're going to make money and get paid. They don't have to fuel the fires. There's enough anger, distrust between the two parties, feeling of betrayal, that they don't have to fuel the fires. There's enough there that's going to be conflict, we call a high conflict divorce, where they will make money. They don't have to cause a further rupture.
Well, let me ask you a question. Does it all depend? Does it depend on how much money you pay the lawyer, of what the lawyer can do? Because there's some lawyers that charge less, some lawyers that charge more. And would the more expensive one do just as, or the less expensive one do just as good a job as the expensive one?
It could be. It just depends upon the individual attorney, their training, how long they've been doing family law, and their personal attitude towards the divorce. Some attorneys only like to work on high-profile cases and charge millions of dollars, and other ones do just as good a job charging $5,000 for a divorce.
I'm sitting here wondering, we talk about a breakup of marriage or divorce, and I'm wondering how different it is for the lawyer to actually handle the different representational systems that come along between the two people. I mean, opposite people attract in a marriage. And so for a lawyer, for example, to talk with a man that's an AD person that's just factual and not actually emotionally connected the same way as maybe a kinesthetic woman, or vice versa, then I'm wondering how that is for the lawyer, or the lawyer has to be somewhat audio-digital in fact form in order to do their job. And I'm wondering if they really get the feeling, that deep-rooted feeling that's going on for the kinesthetic partner, whether that be the man or the woman. To me, they're very different things, and I'm wondering how many lawyers have any sort of notion of the way people represent the world and how differently they handle the different partner.
Well, I think the clients of a divorce are the greatest challenge for the lawyer because their personalities are so different, and they come to it in a different way. And, it's true that you say that opposites attract, but if you see behavior in a marriage, it's usually happening on both sides.
Oh, absolutely.
Otherwise, yeah.
Right. And,
Absolutely, yeah.
and certainly a man approaches a divorce differently than a woman. And, but they both need reassurance. They both need guidance. They both need support. They both need to know it's going to be okay. And they both need nurturing, and depending on what point of the divorce, right at the very beginning, some of my male clients need a tremendous amount of telephone contact with me or personal contact with me. And then as time goes on, they need less contact. And same thing with the women.
was going to say, what is the difference between a woman and a man going through a divorce? What is the dramatic difference? You know, what does the woman think and the man think? And you've probably represented both men and women, but there's always two lawyers involved anyway, right?
Yes. But sometimes it's the same and sometimes it's different. I think a woman comes in and says, I need to make sure that my kids are okay and that I'm secure and that after this is all done, I will have a stable life. And I don't trust him because he's betrayed me, so he's going to take advantage of me. And the husband comes in and says, I've been supporting her my whole life. I've done everything I could for her. And I don't know, she just wants to take and take and take. So those are kind of the two basic attitudes that I see.
Yeah, that's a big difference, though. It's nice to hear that the women are concerned about their children, though. I think that's really, that's what you see. I think that's great.
I don't mean to say that the men are not concerned about their children, but I think the women use the children against the man to say, I'm going to use the children to, I'm going to say I'm protecting them, and she believes she is, but in essence, she's using the children in a negative way.
Yes, we see it all the time.
Right.
All the time.
Yeah, yeah.
Right, and you know, like the women sometimes blackmail the men. I'm not going to let you see the kids unless you do what I want. And then the custody becomes a tool to get what they want financially.
Interesting. So I'm very curious about the fact that, well, that's not what I'm curious about. What I'm curious about is this.
Start again.
I already know that you are very awake and very spiritual and very conscious. What I'm curious about is how do you make that work in a court system that mostly isn't?
Okay, the court system is a microcosm of the real world. So just as you make it work, you being spiritual and a lot of the world not being spiritual is the way I do it in the court system. I have to say that there are many judges, clerks, court reporters, bailiffs that are conscious and aware enough to bring great results in cases. Now, there are some judges and other court personnel that are not conscious, and they're more difficult to deal with because they're not looking to the solution. They're looking for who won and who lost, and there's many family law judges that will approach things and say, how do I help this family? And I believe those are being very conscious.
So
Absolutely.
you find most judges are quite fair then up there, because I think people often think that a judge can sort of go whichever way he favors, but he's actually not like that. He's actually fair on understanding both sides, which is what he has to do anyway, but sometimes they waver one side to the other side. But you're saying that they're very fair and quite conscious. That's nice to hear.
And I'm wondering, do you bring that perspective to your clients who are probably very concerned about having to deal with those kinds of issues during a divorce? Do you soothe those clients and really allow them to understand how things will proceed and that there are caring people along the way in the system that can facilitate the outcome that is most desirable?
Yes, absolutely. You know, I have to also say there's another side to that. Sometimes we have experience with certain judges that seem to be biased. They seem to give you a result that favors women in custody battles or favors men. So sometimes, you know, it doesn't exactly work out that way. And, you know, I had one case last week where a young man, an LAPD police officer, came in to my office. I've been representing him for about a year, and he thinks the system's completely unfair, and he wants to give up being a father to his son. And I'm having a conversation with him.
Oh.
I don't think that's a good idea.
No.
And he says, well, I made my decision, and that's what I'm going to do.
Do you try to keep most of your divorced cases out of court? Is it better to try to keep them settled out of court?
It's always better to settle. Two parties coming to the table and agreeing to things will follow the agreement much better than court orders. Less conflict in a family is always better. The toll on the family is astronomical. What happens to kids and parents when they go through a divorce, they get devastated. It takes them years to recover from the situation.
Yeah.
Do you think parents, when they're getting a divorce, should confront their children a little more than they do? They always try to hide it from their children, thinking that their walls are made of cast iron and nothing can be heard or seen. And so therefore the kids hear things but don't really understand the whole conversation. Do you think more parents that are getting a divorce should really sort of sit down as a family again, if it's possible, and sort of explain to the children, because they get affected awfully hard on this whole thing because they don't understand it, and explain to them what is going on and why and how, so that they don't wander around not knowing what's happening, really?
I think that would be a very helpful thing to do with the kids. The problem is, you can't have a continuous dialogue with your children about what's going on in your divorce. Right. It's very detrimental to them. You can have a preliminary conversation that changes are coming, and then when you get to the place where you have an agreement or a court order that there's going to be a change in visitation, both parents should sit down with the kids and say, look, this is what happened, this is what we decided as a family, the judge agrees with us in the case, and this is what's going to be happening from now on. But don't involve them with the ups and downs of the divorce.
No, and too many children have anxiety just about just that, because every step of the process they are being informed about, and I think it's very difficult, very, very difficult.
I mean,
very, very hard on them. And then you're right, Mary, they never get over it, these kids. They always bring it up, even, 35, 40. I remember what my mother went through, and it's something that they seem to attach themselves to, which is understandable. But how can they unattach themselves and sort of try to live, because divorce is there's so many divorces now out there anyway, so it's become like an everyday thing, which it shouldn't be, but it is. And how can we get them to sort of get over this feeling? And how can the parents and, how can all this sort of work in an easier way than it is working?
That's in the second segment, We're still in the first.
Okay. That's fine.
All right, so Barry, I'm curious about when all parties are meeting in a conference room, would that be a negotiating meeting or would that be a discovery meeting? I don't know what it's called since I'm not
usually a settlement conference.
Okay. So how do you deal with people's behaviors when they completely go off the wall?
We separate them.
Like kids?
We put them in different rooms. And the attorneys do kind of like a shuttle diplomacy.
Uh-huh.
So the attorneys talk. My client's willing to do this. What is your client willing to do? We split up. We go into the different rooms. We come back and meet again. We got agreement on this point. Let's go to the next point.
How often does this happen?
It should happen all the time, but it doesn't. Whenever you're trying to settle a case and people are willing to settle, it will happen. But if they're not willing to settle, if they're greedy or too angry, then you're going to have to go through the court system. The judge is going to have to decide.
In Australia, they have 3 different levels, so that first of all, you can have your conversation by phone if you don't want to have anything more to do with the partner, and they ring both people and then do the negotiation in the middle. Or you can go to a courtroom and have separate rooms, and then, as you say, negotiate in the middle of the separate rooms, which is a lot quicker. And or you come together and both lawyers, both partners. You've got 3 different levels that you can choose as to how you want to resolve the situation.
The other thing too is that sometimes people want to get a divorce, but they don't want to end the marriage. So they use the divorce to keep the communication and the negative contact going for as long as possible. And I, as a therapist, see that a lot. So they want a divorce, but they're not ready to end the marriage. And divorces go on and on and on and on and on, just so that they can continue that negative contact. And do you see that, Barry?
Oh, absolutely. There's some divorces that take 6 months to a year, and then there are other divorces that take 5 to 10 years.
Oh, my God.
Wow.
And
5 to 10 years.
They just never stop. They just keep litigating and litigating and litigating. And either one of them or both of them are crazy, or they have what Jamie's describing, this desire to still have contact and try to reconcile through negative energy.
Well, you represent a lot of people out of Hollywood, the celebrities. What's a typical length of time for them to get a divorce? Are they any different than the rest of the public?
No, they're not different, but
3 weeks?
Kobe Bryant and his wife did it in like a month. And then Alec
Tom Cruise.
Baldwin and Kim Basinger are probably about 3 or 4 years, and they're still fighting. So, you know, if you have kids and there's a constant battle over custody of the kids, the court has jurisdiction until the kids are 18. So that gives you a lot of space to argue about things.
What
Interesting.
about the opposite, though? I find also there's the opposite, that what Jamie was saying as well, where people will stay together in separate rooms and hardly have a relationship, and yet they won't get a divorce. And that's usually because of the financial splitting up, that a lot of the women don't feel they can go and do it on their own, and so they'll just tolerate being in that house, that household, and almost blame the kids or whatever it is for the reason for staying. But it's like this the scaredness of going through that actual legal process.
I think that happens sometimes, that people stay together for security. Or they say, I don't want to disturb the children's lives until they're old enough to handle it, or after their school, or after their bar mitzvah, or after they're in college. And they feel like they sacrifice their lives for their children, and then they're resentful later.
Well, what's the least it could cost to get a divorce?
Do it yourself.
Do it yourself.
No. I mean, as an attorney, like, what should somebody anticipate spending?
If they're willing, if the two parties are willing to sit down and make an agreement, they could do a divorce for $5,000 or under.
Okay. And that's using a high-profile attorney such as yourself, or
Yes.
okay. That's good to know. I think
Do
people.
you find you have more divorces with just parents with no children, or do they a lot of times is more involved because they have children?
The complication of a divorce is created by the attitudes of the two parties, the amount of property that's involved, financial gain or loss between them, who's going to end up with it, and the complexities of the children. 1 child, 2 child, 3 child, the age of the children, because they go through different stages. And, you know, once the child's over 14, pretty much the child's going to do what the child wants. And regardless of what the parents and the court say, the child's going to say, I want to be with my dad, or I want to be with my mom, and it's going to be hard to change that.
How often do you have a situation where one of the parties have monies that are hidden, maybe even in a different country like Switzerland or some other places, and the other party knows about it and lets the attorney know? How difficult is it for you to discover that?
Well, and it comes up often in cases where people came from foreign countries and now they're U.S. citizens and live in the United States, but they still have ties to those other countries. It's very hard to find the assets in the other country, but it is possible. We hire private investigators that go to Israel, private investigators in Iran. You can find property, but it depends whose name is it in. Is it in the husband or wife's name, or is it in the brother's name, or is it in the parent's name? So what you have to do is you kind of have to rebuild it and see how the property got there. So we use forensic accountants to go back and trace money and follow it from when it was earned, to which bank account it went into, and then it disappeared, and where did it go, where did it get transferred to, and then it went the trip to outside the country. Most banks outside the country will not respond to a subpoena. So you have no power to get the information.
Resource, yeah.
But
And also this becomes far more expensive, doesn't it? That would become very expensive bringing in...
It does become expensive, but under California law, the parties have a duty to disclose all this information. So, and they have to disclose it voluntarily. There's new statutes that requires them to turn over their financial documents to the other side, full disclosure. And so when they don't, the remedy is later, they pull the money out, they buy a new business, they buy a new house, and where did they get that money from? Well, guess what? The other spouse can go back into court and get 50 to 100% of that asset, plus their attorney's fees paid, because the other party defrauded them out of that property. And there's no statute of limitations on that.
Oh, wow.
There's
That's
no limit to it.
interesting to know that people can actually come back, because I don't think most people don't know that if a man or woman have hidden money or they've hidden property or assets or whatever, and then they start using it after the divorce, then either party can come back.
And there's one other thing that's pretty common, especially with foreign persons that are now living in the United States, is they have close relationships with their family, and business interests are kind of tied together. So they kind of switch identities, and the husband might be using the brother's credit card, or the wife may be using the father's credit card to, spend money and live. So we have a way of reconstructing from the expenses that are spent to construct what the marital standard of living was during the marriage. And the spouse that's being the out spouse that doesn't have the money can get a higher spousal support order and child support order based on that.
Wow. So that was actually my follow-up question is, when you have a high-profile case and you have to take in 10 boxes of documentation to court, what creates that amount of files? I mean, how do you create 10 boxes of files?
Well, it's
on a divorce case?
It's not that difficult, unfortunately. It depends upon how many properties are involved, how many bank accounts are involved, how much money is involved, how many businesses. Wow. So if you have two productive people that own property in different states and different countries, and by the way, California has jurisdiction in a divorce over property anywhere in the world. So even though the divorce is happening in California, if they have a property in Switzerland, the court in California can order it sold. So, and bank accounts. How many years is the marriage? How long do you have to trace the business? What are the valuations of the business? How big is the business? What if you have a $100 million business? Look what happened with the Dodgers. The Dodger divorce, I think there was 10 attorneys on each side. When you went into the courtroom, I sat in the courtroom one day, and there was literally 25 attorneys in the courtroom at one time for both sides of the case.
Wow. What happens with a prenuptial? I know they have a 10-year span on a prenuptial when you get married, and sometimes it's longer or shorter, but how does that exactly work? If a prenuptial is for 10 years, and say it's 12 years now, they can actually go in and fight it, correct?
No. It depends what the prenuptial says. Two spouses have the power to contract around California law in any way that they want. So they could change a community property asset to a separate to a community. They can say that one spouse is barred from ever getting any of the separate property or any of the earnings. And it doesn't end at 10 years or 12 years. I think that's a myth.
That's what I thought,
Unless the contract says that in 10 years this premarital agreement becomes void, and then it would become void. But it's based on contract law.
Because I think you're right. A lot of people do think that it only is 10 years and it automatically stops after 10 years, and that's why my question was, because I didn't think it did. I think it goes on, and as you say, whatever's written into the contract, that's actually what it is, but there's no cut-off time ever unless it's put in the contract.
Correct.
So I'm also wondering, Barry, since you mentioned that there are some divorces that go on for 4 or 5 years, how does it affect people's health, or does it?
It does. It takes a great toll on the parents, the husband and wife going through a divorce. First of all, when a divorce starts, it's because there's a breakdown in the relationship. And no breakup in any relationship is pleasant. Very few. That people could sit at a table and say, I loved you up through this point. I'm sorry this happened. We're going to part company, and they're still friends. It's the exception to the rule. Mm-hmm. The rule is that people feel betrayal, anger, hate, want revenge, and are insecure and fearful. And so it starts there. And it takes a toll on them because they thought they had their life worked out. They thought they were going to be together with the person for the next 20 years. And now all of a sudden, everything's turned upside down. They don't know where they're going to live. They don't know if they could keep their residence. They don't know if they're going to have enough money.
Practical issues.
Yeah, and it's very disconcerting. And then they get into the conflict of the divorce. You know, some people are asleep when they're going through the divorce because they're in shock from the disaster of the loss of the marriage. And
They don't want to admit it.
yeah, they're not even aware of what's going on, you know, when they're going through the divorce. And then, so it takes a great toll on them, and everyone should be getting therapy. Everyone needs therapy when they're going through a divorce.
Interesting. All right, so I'm also curious about, you know, how many attorneys are in the United States? Do you know? Over 100,000?
Oh, no, just in California, I think there's over 150,000 active attorneys.
Or just in California? Okay, so that's servicing 20 million people.
Yes.
Okay, sorry, I was way off. I don't know what I was
Little
thinking. So there could be millions of attorneys in the United States, right?
Yes.
Yeah, millions. All right. So obviously, the public has some kind of a perception of these millions of attorneys. And not too many people have a chance to experience someone like you. Most people experience, and I don't know if I want to quote this, but maybe I will. So my truth about it would be, is based on my experiences, that attorneys are working at the level of auto salesmen. And when I look at their commercials on television, I get the same thing, and that's my proof. Does that make sense?
Well, are you talking about personal injury attorneys?
Yes.
Look, I don't think attorneys have a good standing for being trustworthy in the community, just in general.
Yes.
I think firemen's number one, probably on the list, and then policemen aren't
They're
that
not-
high. They're
not
lower.
very
No,
high
Okay.
anymore.
absolutely.
So,
They're low.
Yeah,
But-
at the moment anyway.
but actually,
Doctors are way up
the
there.
rules of professional conduct that govern what an attorney has to comply with, they're very strict and they're enforceable. So really, attorneys have to act with integrity. And, you know,
But, you know, beyond that, clients need to know that they have a choice and that they should go and interview different attorneys until they find someone that they feel comfortable with. It's the same thing as a therapist. There's a million therapists out there and probably a handful of good therapists. But it's so important to empower the client and give them the choice to choose. And I don't think that clients necessarily feel that that is the choice that they have, because usually they come at moments of desperation. And I'm hoping that you encourage clients or other attorneys to shop around, to find someone that they feel comfortable with.
Well, how would you
Our
interview
recommendation is
one?
good.
Like, what would the questions you would ask?
what I would ask an attorney
Yeah.
that I was going to hire,
Yeah.
how experienced are you in this area of law? How many cases have you had? How many years have you been practicing? If I have children in custody, how many custody cases? Are you a specialist in this area? Because in California, they have designations for specialists in certain areas.
So what happened in your divorce?
In my divorce, I hired an attorney.
Yeah, you did? based on those things?
Was it good?
Actually, he turned out to be a friend of my family, like a friend of the family, friend of the family's partner. I didn't know him before the divorce, but my family knew. I knew my mother and the attorney's mother grew up in the same town in Poland.
High quality referral.
High quality referral. And
Good to be referred by a friend or by somebody that knows somebody or
Yes.
an acquaintance or a good reputation there. So to find a good lawyer is really go through your friends first and find out what they had him as a lawyer to do, and to sort of go through a friend.
personal referrals
Yes,
are the
I
best.
had a referral when I went through my divorce, and this lady was amazing because she said to me, well, the more you do to help me, the less it's going to cost and the easier it is going to go through. So she said, why don't you sit down and write up, even if it takes you 3 days, it doesn't matter, write up your perspective of your relationship with your husband over that time. And so I did. I just wrote and wrote and wrote the whole thing and handed it to her, and that saved hours and hours and hours of lawyer person confrontation, because she had a total my perspective, and then she just needed to go with that and then have a look at the other perspective as it came through. When my husband got his lawyer, the stuff that came through by fax and different means, I was horrified because I knew they weren't my husband's words. So all of a sudden I had this other person involved in the divorce that was totally different, and the words that came through, and I'm going, oh my God, he would never have said that. And it was really hurtful, and I thought, wow, what a difference in these two lawyers just here.
Well, are there times, Barry, where clients do not want to have any contact with each other and they want the attorneys to be the voice for them throughout?
Yes.
Wow.
Yes.
And how does that work?
I just had a young lady that came to me. She didn't have much money, and it was only a one-year marriage, and she was very disappointed, very hurt. And she said, I don't want to go see him. I don't want to talk to him. But he took all my jewelry and all my personal property. So I said, is he willing to give it back to you? And she said, yes, but I'd have to go see him. So I said, would you like to save $20,000? She said, yes. Go see him.
So what's up with these? Well, we way well into the solutions and tools and things that we can offer to our viewers, how they can make this a better experience. But what's up with these retainers? I mean, every time I needed to hire an attorney, it's always $2,500 to $5,000 just to even start speaking.
Yes.
Is that really a standard thing in this field?
$2,500 to $25,000 is the standard. And if you have a high-profile one, probably the initial retainer is $100,000 or more. So, but the reason the retainer occurs is to actually give the capital to the attorney to finance the case. Because once the attorney gets into the case and really starts working on it, he uses all his resources. You know,
He has to pay bills.
He has to pay bills, right? He has a staff. He has to hire people to do things. And if he doesn't have the money available to pay those expenses, he then has to start chasing the client for money. So it almost causes a little bit of a conflict, because now the client's saying, I want you to do A, B, C, D, and E. But the lawyer says to the client, well, I need $50,000 to do that. And the client says, well, I don't have the money.
Go do it and bill me.
Bill me.
So what happens when I've got a coaching client that actually hired a lawyer to assist her, and she paid the money up front that he wanted. And now she said, I don't like what he's doing, because it seems to me he really thinks the opposition's going to win. And so she said, what happens to my retainer? What happens to that money I paid?
Well, unfortunately, lawyers in their retainer agreement do not guarantee a result. They say, I'm going to do the work, I'm going to do the best I can, and I hope it works out for you. And, you know, as long as the lawyer wasn't incompetent or negligent, and, you know, judges make decisions based on all the facts. And, you know, this is one thing that clients have a real hard time with. They don't understand that things are happening because of the facts of the case. So, you know, if there are facts that say husband had $500,000, put it into a house before they were married and bought a house, and now the house has no equity, and wife, even though you worked in this house for 10 years, you get nothing, that's because of the facts of the case. It's not because the judge doesn't like the wife or care about the wife. It's fact-driven. And results are according to facts. There's one other area that comes into play with parties, and that's credibility. So, you know, sometimes people say things in court that the judges just don't believe. They just don't think it's real. And once you lose credibility with the judge is not going to believe what you say in the rest of the case. So that will affect the outcome.
And how about you? Are there times when you take a client on and you are not believing what they're saying, and not only that, you don't even like them? How difficult does it make it for you to then represent them and finish that?
I won't take a position that a client wants me to take unless I believe it's the correct position under the law and factually. a lawyer has a duty to present only credible, factual, and legal issues to a judge. He has a duty not to mislead the court. He has a duty not to fabricate evidence and a duty not to...
How about hiding evidence?
Well, hiding's a little bit different. It's not a criminal case. So we have an adversarial system. So one side presents the best case for their side.
Well, what
and
I'm
the
saying
other
is,
side,
hang on. I'm saying the guy says, okay, so the husband is your client, right?
Right.
And he says to you, well, I have $500,000 in an account that my wife doesn't know about.
right.
Now what?
So I send him a letter telling him, you need to disclose that to the other side. And if your wife finds out about it later, you can lose the whole $500,000 because it comes under the omitted asset statute, and it's a breach of fiduciary duty. And I tell him if he doesn't disclose it, I'm going to have a conflict of interest.
But once you send him a letter, that becomes part of the case, and it's in the file, and the other party can discover it, right?
No, it's
No?
attorney-client privilege
Oh, really?
communication.
So you don't have to turn that over?
No, it remains confidential.
Wow.
You're allowed to
But
keep your client's
there is
secrets.
the conflict of interest.
Confidential, yes, absolutely.
There is a conflict of interest, and then the lawyer has to decide whether they can proceed representation or withdraw from the case.
So what do you do?
Why
when
doesn't
Withdraw from the case.
Why does a man or a woman hide stuff in the first place from their husband or from their wife? What is their intention when, in a divorce, they've got to bring it back up again? So what difference does it make?
Well,
Power.
Oh,
Power.
yeah.
Power and control.
Control.
how about greed and revenge?
Yeah.
Revenge.
Well,
There's a guy at
aren't most people... Hang on for a
They
minute.
have to bring it up anyway. They have to disclose it, right?
But
Hang on for a second.
some of them want to spend it before
Wait a
the
minute.
divorce, so the wife doesn't get the 50%. There was a guy I knew, and he was running around getting his teeth done. There was another 10 grand worth of dental work. He was buying a new car. He was getting all this stuff done,
Wouldn't the
just
wife
so
know
that she
that?
wouldn't get. Well, she doesn't. He's not. The revenge was so high. He was not going to give her that 50%.
Oh,
So he was getting
they must do it.
everything he could possibly do before that became evident. And it was just, I thought, you can get all your teeth done, but your health's going to be shit anyway by the time, you know what I mean? Because at the end of the day, you're going to be so stressed from all of this that, yeah, those good teeth might even fall out. So
We won't wish that, though.
So isn't it accurate, Barry, that most people that come to you and see you, aren't they worried about only two things? The kids, if they have them, and what they're going to walk away with. Aren't pretty much those two things?
Yes, but included in walking away with is security. Are they going to be safe in the future? Not only financially, emotionally safe, and then actually physically safe. Because when people break up and hostilities occur, sometimes violence occurs. It's very common that a person who has never struck their spouse gets so angry when the spouse says, I cheated on you, and hits the spouse. And so there's a fear there that there might be physical violence. There are some cases in California where this guy actually arranged the murder of his wife because he didn't want her to get his jewelry business.
Lovely.
So, so security is a big issue.
What happens when people, because there's a lot of them doing it now, living together and not married, but they don't, either one want to get married, and then all of a sudden they both want to split? How does that work if someone's been together sort of 10, 15 years, and all of a sudden they've communicated, they've got all this stuff, and now they're going to part, but there's no marriage?
Well, it's not a good situation for the person leaving, especially if that person doesn't have the assets or the money. So what happens in that case is if they had a contract, an oral contract or an implied contract, that the wealthier person agreed to take care of the person that had less resources, they have nothing when they leave. Absolutely nothing. They get no spousal support, no alimony, no attorney's fees to finance the case. The only way is if there is a breach of a contract. So if there was a contract between them in some way, like the husband says to the wife, the girlfriend, I'm going to pay the rent for you and all your living expenses up to $10,000 for the rest of your life. If that statement's made, and the girlfriend can prove that statement was made, either because if it's her word against his word, that's not enough. So there's got to be some third party or performance. So
Or
he
a contract,
performed it.
or something in writing.
Writing's the best, but in most of those situations, you won't find a writing.
Because I think a lot of people seem to think that this, after 7 years, again, I keep quoting these numbers, but after a certain time that everything becomes equal and everybody, they have half and half. But when you actually come to the nitty-gritty of it and you're splitting, you're both mad at each other anyway and you don't want to see each other. So naturally, if you don't have any legality to anything, then you walk away with nothing. And I don't think people understand that.
Well, keep in mind that in California, there is no common law marriage, which is what you're describing.
Yeah,
Correct.
we have
But
that
in
Illinois.
other states, and this is broadcast all over the world, in other states in the United States, there is common law marriage. And in a common law
10 years.
marriage, after you stay a certain length of time, you're considered married. So, and there's different rules in each state. So
Yeah,
that,
in Australia, that's the case as well. I thought it was 6 months, but now it's only 3 months. If you are together, living together, then it is deemed that, and so some people get nervous about that, and I've actually known couples now who live in their own houses and then come together in either house for their sexual activities, etc., because the moving in is not very long before it's deemed as a marriage.
Community property.
so they're breaking up at 2 months, 29 days?
So who usually gets the house and the
who's
kids?
counting?
Who usually gets the house and the kids? Barry?
There is no usual, but I have to say, in California, there is a statute that says if it's the best interest of the children to keep the kids in the residence and until the kids are old enough to make that transition, the court will order the residence not sold and the spouse taking care of the kids would stay in that residence longer, and it won't be sold until the kids are old enough until it becomes their best interest.
What
But
about
the first part of your
payments?
question, hang on one sec. The first part of the question that you asked, who usually ends up with the house? It has to do a lot with money. So if someone before the marriage has $500,000 and puts it down on a house, and now the house, they bought it for $2 million, and now the house is worth $3 million, that person has to get that $500,000 back. It's called a reimbursement under the family code. So if the wife, or I'm assuming it's a husband, okay, that has that money, but I shouldn't because it could be the wife too, because she could have had it by inheritance or from income. I mean, women make as much money as men in certain situations.
Absolutely.
So if the spouse that didn't make that investment can't pay back the money, then the spouse that made the investment is going to end up with the house. So a lot of times it's financial. It's not emotional who ends up with the house.
Interesting. So we have limited time left before the show ends here. I want to make sure that we address this, which is, what's the conscious way of going through a divorce? What's the high road?
The highest road you can take is sitting down with your spouse at a table, probably with a helper, a lawyer, a psychologist, a mediator, somebody that knows family law, that can walk you through who is supposed to get what. If you give two people a roadmap and say, look, under these facts and circumstances, wife is entitled to A and husband's entitled to B. Even if you go to a judge, this is what the judge is going to do. That's going to help them come to a resolution. So if they can get pre-educated about what they're entitled to, not what they want, not what they desire, not what they hope for, but what they're entitled to. And then let's work out a practical situation. We're going from one household to two. How is the couple going to be able to afford that? Maybe one spouse didn't work during the marriage. Maybe one spouse has to get re-educated. Maybe one spouse has to get a new career. How long is that going to take before that spouse becomes self-sufficient and is able to contribute to their own household? So there has to be a plan made
Yes, and
that
I have to
makes sense
say,
for the family.
the reason that people wait so long is because they don't want this to even have this conversation. This is the avoiding of this exact conversation that couples are wanting to avoid until the end.
They
whenever
need
that
help.
is.
They need the help of a professional when they have that conversation,
Yes.
because they really don't know whether.
No.
Well, I had a divorce. I was married 29 years, and I had a divorce. It was more of a convenience divorce, but it was getting a little shaky, and we'd been in it for about 9 months. And of course, I always called my husband Jim, whatever. And this particular time, I said to him, I said, James, we need to sit down and talk and work out what exactly we want, because we seem to be quite muddled up as to what we want. And we were able to sit down and have this conversation, which was intriguing to me because I didn't think he would do that, and he did. So sometimes I think we assume that our other half, man or woman, is not going to sit down and actually want that conversation. But sometimes if you provoke that conversation or you introduce that conversation, sometimes they're very relieved to have that and also want the same as you but didn't know how to go about it. So my husband was a bit shy, so I started this conversation with him, and we worked the whole thing out. In fact, after our divorce, we all four went to have dinner, the two lawyers and my husband and I, and we all had dinner
That's
together.
that's
It was
great.
Wow.
really, it was beautiful, but it was it was the courage. Sometimes you think, well, the other person should sit down and have the conversation, but sometimes you have to understand a little bit, and sometimes you have to make that move yourself, if that's what you want, to sit down and sort of try to have that conversation. So I think it's sometimes understanding, not that you understand each other at that particular time, but try to make that first step to do that. I think it would be very good for our audience to understand that.
Okay.
Mary,
Also,
would you
one-
tell
This
us-
is the, I know you guys have the tendency to really turn this on at the end of the show. We've got 2 minutes left.
Okay, but can we just hear about the divorce project really quick?
Yes, the Divorce Project is a project we created in our office. I'm working with Jody Isaac on that. And the purpose of it is to bring the resources of the divorce attorney, forensic accountant, psychologist, custody evaluator, real estate appraiser, as a panel to the community so that they could ask questions and become educated. And we set up a website for that, thedivorceproject.com. And we're intending in the future to do seminars and webcasts where we're going to be giving out information and open up questions and answers.
Wonderful.
Yeah, fantastic.
Fantastic.
What I always, real quickly, what I also was hearing in between the lines that we haven't said, and this is something maybe the general public doesn't understand or get, is that, and Ninon talked about this beautifully, that the solution, the high road, is really what Ninon did.
Take the high road.
But what's happening is people don't understand, I think, that if they can't agree within themselves, then they losing control by starting to get involved all these other professionals and the judge. And ultimately what's going to happen is it's not what they want or what they would like that's going to happen. It's whatever the systems and the processes that have been set up in the law is what's going to determine the end result, right?
That's correct. And they're also going to get much less.
Yes.
Because the
Absolutely,
professionals
and I
all have to
Because
get
of,
paid.
because of all the fee, because of all the
People
fees.
only
You know,
understood.
many judges, when they're dealing with complicated matters in the court, they say to the litigants, they're up on the bench, and they say, look, if you two can't go in the hall and decide this, I'm going to decide it for you.
Yeah, exactly.
But who's the best to decide this?
Those
You
two,
two.
the two that
It's
can
your
enforce.
family. I may not make a decision that either one of you are going to like, and I'm sure my decision, neither one of you are going to like. So do you want to go in the hallway and try again?
I think it becomes a challenge of who's going to win, and that they sort of go berserk of the financial status, or the right way to go and watch go is I'm going to win this, and nobody really wins.
All right, so we got to wrap up. So thank you very much for Barry Fisher. Thank you for
Thank
being
you.
here, Barry.
Thank you for having me. I
Fantastic.
really enjoyed it.
And thank you for all of our cast members, as well as everybody behind the glass, the technical people, and of course, all of our viewers. It's been an awesome show. And remember to always vote on our shows. Come to our website at livingconsciously.tv. The more you vote on our shows, of course, the more they are being played on channel 56, 57, and 219. And again, we're going to be here every Saturday, same time, same place, in the Denver studio at 3 p.m. Mountain Standard Time. And I love you all, and thank you very much. See you next week.
Lovely too. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks.